Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Being the Best Version of Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. Today, we have a special guest, Matt Douglas. So, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, how you guys doing? My name is Matt Douglas. I've been an educator for a long time. Used to be a high school teacher and an administrator at some private schools. And now most of the work that I do is around college consulting and teen mentorship. And so this is kind of the college application season for high school seniors out there, and they're really in it. And so I'm happy to talk about anything related to the college admissions process or teen life or any of that. There's a lot going on nowadays for these kids.
I agree. Well, we'll definitely dive into that. I guess you also have a fairly new book out, too, right?
Yeah. So the book that you can see up there, I released in April. It's called Unlocking College Admissions. It's basically a workbook that walks students, parents, and professionals through the college search and application process. The first 2/3 or so is workbooks format, and it's kind of like how I would approach the college consulting process with a student, but in book form. So instead of being a little more expensive, it's $25. And then the back is informational guides on everything from SATs to the college essay to college costs and scholarships, mostly for parents. I found it's been a really, really helpful resource for a lot of families who've used it so far.
Okay, great. Well, and I'll make sure to put that in the show notes so everyone can take to look at that
Right.
as
Yeah.
well. So, all right. So let's jump right in. Definitely happy to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Ask whatever you think's relevant to talk about. There's a lot going on for these kids, like we were saying. So
Yeah.
happy to get
All
whatever
right.
makes
So at
sense.
this point in the process, so paint a picture of where a lot of kids like they are in the college process at this point, being in, pretty much mid-December and
Sure.
looking at, where to go from here for a lot of kids based on kind of how things went, if they've already heard back from schools and, maybe a little bit how to kind of navigate some of the stress around all of this.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the high school seniors first, then I'll talk a bit about the other high school students and where they might be. So for high school seniors, this is kind of the little bit of like a lull in between the early deadlines, the early application, the early action, and early decision deadlines that are typically in October or November. And then the regular decision deadlines, the application deadlines that are typically January, February, and sometimes March. And so some students are already hearing back from their schools, acceptances, rejections, wait lists, deferred, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of kind of excitement, but also pressure and nervousness I find in the high school senior community right now and among parents too. And then there's this kind of feeling of, well, I have these applications coming up in January or February, and what do I do? How do I just let it be because I already wrote my essay for my early action schools, or do I keep working on it? And so what I find is a lot of students are kind of navigating the stressors of that. They're navigating the stressors of just being a high school student, having to keep your grades up, the stressors of the holidays coming up. For some students, that's really exciting. For some, it's stressful. And then just this sort of like what I kind of find as the agita of students who are high school seniors slowly taking one step closer to graduating high school and going off to college. And for every student I've ever worked with, it's a combination of nervousness and excitement. And that plays out in weird ways. Parents see all kinds of different things from their kids a lot of the time. And sometimes they're wondering what's going on. And so I see a lot of that. It's sort of a tumultuous time, basically, for high school seniors. And then for juniors and underclassmen, it's really about like they see the older students going through this process and wondering, I'm next. It's coming up for me soon. And what do I do about that? But, I'm still in high school. I got time. I don't have to worry. But a lot of what this period is like thinking about the classes you're taking, the grades you're getting, the extracurriculars you're doing, kind of what you're doing to build your high school resume to eventually give you the best possible chances of getting into whatever post-secondary experiences you're looking for, whether it's a four-year college from Ivy all the way down, whether it's community college, gap year, work, internship, whatever it might be. So, yeah, a lot going on for all these kids. I see it every day. But my basic guidance is just trust the process, go one step at a time, work on your essay, make sure it's as good as it can be, write a solid activities list, research your schools, know when your deadlines are, be organized. So yeah, that's the short version of all this.
Oh, definitely good advice. I mean, one something you brought up or kind of in a little sort of in passing a minute ago, but I thought sort of something to go back to is the question of to build on a little bit is, how do you approach it where you have a student who, their idea of where they want to go to school doesn't really match kind of what might necessarily be a good fit,
Yeah.
either in terms of things about the size of the school or about maybe the rigor of a school Because I can see that, when you get to the point of senior year, you may have this preconceived notion of these are the schools I'm interested in. Whether it's, kids who are very high achieving and want Ivy League school, whether or not they can get in or not, if it's a good fit. But also, for other kids that maybe aren't are not, quite as strong academically as they might want to be, and worry about that, being able to kind of get into the schools that they feel like someone would expect them to go to. Like, how do you approach that kind of conversation? Because that's
That is
an
such a
equipment that
good
also is,
comment.
can be challenging, I imagine.
Yeah, it's such a good point to bring up. Really, it really, really is. I see it all the time. So my philosophy, and in my opinion, any good academic counselor, college consultant, the focus should be on the concept of best fit. Best fit is the idea of what is the best post-secondary experience for you or your student or your child. And like I said, that could be an Ivy or any other four-year college, community college, trade school, could be almost anything. And so what I find fairly often is there are preconceived notions from the students and the families about what is the quote unquote right fit. They are very frequently the correct notions, but very frequently, I don't want to say wrong, but not the right fit for what the student might need or is looking for. So I break this down a lot in my book. But when I work with students, what I try to do from day one is to have that conversation about best fit. And I'll give you a few examples. So there's a student that I was working with about 2 years ago now. And really bright kid, but a very, very STEM kid. And I was working with another consultant at the time, and he was telling us, and his mom was telling us, he really wants to go to a hands-on school where he's learning, where he's doing research, where he's really in it. He's got small classes and has teachers and professors that he gets to know. And so that's what we're really looking at. And as the family went on, his grades were excellent. He had the opportunity to get into some really, really top schools. And he ended up applying to an Ivy League college, their engineering program, and he got in. Well, good for him. But our counsel to him was, look, you've said from day one that you're really looking for a very specific experience. You're looking for support, small classes, professors that you can talk to and get to know, and basis research opportunities as an undergrad. And the reality is that that's unlikely for you to find at this Ivy League school that you're looking at. He ended up choosing to go there, and I wish him all the best. I hope he's doing great. But we have to, I think it's our responsibility as college consultants to navigate those conversations professionally and meaningfully. All we can ever do is give advice. We're guides, right? We're opening doors. We're sharing with students and families what they might not already know. And we are using our professional expertise to guide them in what we think are the best directions. And now that student might do phenomenally at that school and have a great life and career. Good for him. I hope he does. But he may realize after a year or two that, you know what, it wasn't the right fit. And then maybe he comes back to us or comes back to some of the schools on that initial list and says, you know what, this was the right fit. And I'll give you one more quick example. There's a student that I'm working with right now, very bright as well, but has a lot of learning differences and social emotional challenges. He's a great kid, but he needs support. And that was pretty clear from day one. And so I was recommending to him and his family some schools that are really supportive. McDaniel College in Maryland, Hofstra University in New York State, near New York City. There's a few others that have really immersive, supportive programs for students with learning differences or other social emotional challenges. And it finally took until last week for him and the family to be like, you know what? Yeah, we do need that, because he was going through the college application process. And he was really struggling. And we're like, well, if you're struggling this much trying to write your essays, how much do you think you're going to struggle in actual college if you go to a top school? So navigating that process can be challenging, but more than anything, it's about just sharing with the family, in our experience, what is the best fit that we know of out there, whether it's a big school or a small school or supportive environment or not, or in a city or rural or close to home or far away, whatever's going to fit that student's needs. There's well over 1,000 colleges in the country. There's going to be at least a few schools that are going to be a good fit, and so it's a process. It's really just a process.
And I appreciate you sharing all that. And another sort of piece of things that you've mentioned a few times in the last few minutes we're talking is just kind of getting at this idea of how do you prepare someone to be successful in college. It's one thing to get into a school, but just because you get into school doesn't automatically mean you're going to be successful at the school.
Yes.
And so, what are things you recommend to high school seniors for this year to help get them ready for college?
That's another great point to bring up. It really depends on the student and where they are academically, and I would say independence wise. So I'll break them into two categories. So one is academics, right? How good are you at school? how good are you at learning, and how good are you at all the other school skills that we call like executive functioning skills nowadays? Time management, organization, study skills, note taking, all those things. If you're really good at those, probably college is going to be not particularly challenging in terms of the academics because you've learned how to be an independent learner and thinker. But for most students, they've never really had to do that. And so if you're worried about the academic piece as a high school student going off to college, it's about really leaning into the fact that come college, you're going to be a lot more of an independent learner than you've probably ever been in high school. Your teachers are not holding your hand. Your parents are not checking in for you for if you've done your homework or not. Your professors are not going to call you if you're late to class. You have to be the one responsible to show up on time and do the work that's assigned. And if you don't, it's your grade. There's a lot of hand holding in high school, even the most rigorous high schools. There's very little, if any, hand holding in college. And then the other piece is I would call like the personal independence piece. Your mom might wake you up in the morning. You might have your medication put out for you, when you're having your breakfast. You might have somebody running your schedule, your parent, whatever it might be. In college, you're very likely going to be hours away from home, living by yourself in a dorm. And there's all the different distractions of college life, the social life, the party life, the just being on your own. I see all the time kids really, really struggle their first semester because they get out of bed too late, or they were staying up until 2 a.m. gaming the night before, or going to a party and they're hungover or something. And so, like, that is the reality of college life for many students. And I think for parents, it's about being honest about that fact. And for students, it's about being honest about that fact too, because you are going off to college, you are an adult. It's your responsibility to take care of yourself and remember that despite all these distractions out there at college, academics are the most important.
Right. And so it sounds like a big piece of things is the idea that it's hard for, a young adult to go off to college and suddenly if someone's been, parents been doing so much for them to suddenly go to doing it all themselves. I mean, like I often think about it as senior year is kind of like a trial run of college, especially for the kind of the personal stuff in terms of, increased independence, ensuring you're getting up yourself, looking at, basic skills like doing your own laundry, like essentially like make it ease the transition into college by being able to be as self-sufficient as possible, with that extra support there as needed in high school, especially senior year.
Yeah, yeah. And so for like parents out there who might be listening or students, I agree. I would treat your senior year like that as kind of like a practice run. So do as many things independently as you can, both school related and like your own personal life. Like don't have your mom set your alarm anymore. You know what I mean? Make sure you're taking care of your homework and your parents aren't reminding you when something's due. Like that's the kind of thing that can matter. There are supports in college that will help, obviously, but your parents will not be there.
Right. And also, if you're for kids that have a lot of supports already in place in high school in terms of tutors and, various other professionals they work with, in college, I mean, you can set up a lot of that stuff, in theory, but basically it's usually the student has to be the one responsible. Like if you're saying anything directly to the school, if like you miss an appointment, maybe they'll follow up, maybe they won't, but they're not going to sort of hold your hand usually in terms of the scheduling piece of things. And so you have to be the one to usually seek out a lot of those supports.
Yeah. And so what I recommend for students who like, if you're worried about this, or if you have like an IEP or a 504 in high school, if you have any of those kind of accommodations, there's a few things I would highly recommend that you do as a senior and then when you're starting in college. So one is to first of all look at the schools that offer supports like this in some way. Every college is going to have a writing center and a tutoring center, but some are better than others. And then some colleges have much more supportive environments with smaller classes, more accommodating professors, student support services at school and whatnot. But what I recommend students do, like when you're visiting colleges or as in your first month or so at the school, go to the student support services center, talk to them about getting accommodations. If you have accommodations in high school, walk in on day one or earlier of college to that disability services or student support services office, whatever they call it, and just say, hey, I want to get these supports just in case I need them. You may never use them, but it's much, much easier to get those accommodations, extra time, whatever it might be, at the beginning of a semester than it is during. It'll save you a lot of headache and hassle. And then make sure you know where the tutoring center is on campus. Make sure you know where the writing center is. Make sure you walk in and just say hi so that you're not, scared to walk in, when it's October 12th and you're like, oh my God, I'm getting straight C's. You know, this is the kind of stuff that you can do to prepare yourself to just give yourself the supports if you might need them. I think that's great advice for any college student.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think to add to that, I mean, what I often recommend is as soon as someone has, gotten an offer and commits to that school, to that point, go to the website for the school for disability support services, or there's different names. Some call it accessibility support services. Some schools have
Yeah.
their own name for it, but whatever the name of this is at that school, usually almost most schools have clear information on their website of what's required as far as usually it's some sort of form you fill out from the school and then you submit the appropriate documentation. But the key here, by doing it early, also allows you to figure out if it turns out that your documentation is not current enough, it gives you some time to try to get updated testing.
Yeah, that's
Because
really good
depending on the
advice.
specific issues, I mean, again, there's some variability, but a lot of times for ADHD or learning disability, most schools do tend to require formal testing. If it's anxiety, it's sort of variable if testing's needed, or more of, someone to write a letter. But usually for anxiety and certain other mental health conditions, the documentation has to be more current than for ADHD or learning disability. But, the idea is basically because sometimes there can be a long waiting list for testing, you want to sort of get that figured out soon so that if you need updated testing, if you haven't had testing done in high school, pretty much you're probably going to need testing done for college. I mean, usually it's about 3 years or so on average for certainly for an ADHD diagnosis. Sometimes for learning disabilities, or I've seen it closer to 5. But the other issue, though, actually, is that a lot of colleges want adult norms for testing, which starts at age 16. So that's also
Yeah.
something to keep in mind. For earlier in the college process, and you have accommodations, is to look at based on when you're doing testing. I mean, sometimes you can the way that the SAT and the ACT have their accommodations now, sometimes you can kind of get by without doing quite as updated testing for that if you've had accommodations in school for long enough, for at least a few months or more. But even if you get accommodations without updated testing for SAT, you usually would still need the updated testing for college. So just factoring that in time wise is definitely important.
Yeah, the student that I'm working with that I mentioned before, who's looking at some of these schools with more supports, that's exactly what happens. The student's on the spectrum. They all know that he has ASD, but he hasn't been tested since elementary school. And so if he's going to walk into any of these programs, they're going to basically say that and say, oh, yeah, you need the support, but you can't get it unless you have some documentation. So that's exactly the conversation that I had with the mom the other day. All right, let's get the testing done sooner rather than later so that everything's good to go once college starts. It's very important to do that if you're in that situation.
Yeah, and I think even in terms of accommodations in school, I mean, I think as you were saying, by law, all schools have to have some real basic accommodations, but colleges really vary in how good, how comprehensive in terms of things they can offer, and how easy it is to access. I mean, I often find with a lot of young adults with executive functioning challenges, if you have to sign up a week in advance to take a test with extended time,
Good
yeah,
luck.
there's a lot of kids that have a hard time with the follow through and doing that. And again, this is where I think also like probably one of my biggest suggestions for people if they have trouble with the time management piece, or if ADHD or various other things, an executive function coach is often a really good. Sometimes you can get it through the school. In some cases, a lot of times you can't. But like that would be, especially the first semester of college, would be sort of a really good one of my top recommendations to people usually, because of the fact that especially if you're doing it privately, they're going to, I think it's a different level of accountability than if it's, you sign up to do it through school. And if you don't show up or you miss a meeting or forget to schedule it, they may not really follow up a whole lot. But if it's a private person, there's a little more accountability. And you can, in some cases, while it's important for the student to be independent, if it's the parents that are hiring the person, there's usually some, release that's signed. And so usually the parents can help a little bit, at least if there's an issue with kind of the follow through on participating.
Yeah, I look at it as different levels of support, right? So, like, if you're a high school student thinking about college, or you're a parent, you're thinking about this for your child, the baseline support that's available at basically every college in the country is the basic accommodations, like extra time, but they almost always require documentation for that. And then there's writing centers and or tutoring centers. That's like the basic foundational support. Then one step up from that, oh, and actually let me just mention, a lot of those tutoring centers, they're peer tutors. So they're upperclassmen in college being your tutor, which can be really hit or miss. So sometimes you have a great college junior who's a tutor at the tutoring center or the writing center, and sometimes they're not that good. You don't really know. So the tutoring and writing centers at colleges are certainly good, but it can really, the quality can really vary. So then the one step up from above that is, like you were saying, having a private or professional tutor or executive functioning coach. I do some executive functioning coaching work specifically with high school and college students. It's very, very helpful for many of them for the reasons that you said. And sometimes colleges provide those. So they're they're not rare, but they're not particularly common. So the colleges that have like more supportive environments tend to have executive functioning coaches or professional tutors at a campus. And if you're poking around at a school's website or you're calling a school and asking about them, that's a question to ask. Do you have peer tutors and executive functioning coach, or are they professionals? Because that can really make a difference. And then the highest level of support is a really comprehensive program at a college that's like a wraparound service. McDaniel, like I mentioned, has a few of those programs where they have executive functioning coaches and academic counselors and social emotional, like behavioralists helping you out. Hofstra has similar programs. George Mason actually has a pretty good program for that for students on the spectrum. They also have executive functioning coaches too that are professional. Oh, sorry. More and more colleges have this, but it's not all that common necessarily. So that's basically the three levels of support: baseline, then some sort of professional outside coach or tutor, and then the wraparound services that colleges sometimes offer.
Well, yeah, so I appreciate you explaining all that because I think it's definitely important to understand. There's obviously a big difference in based on the school and what level of support that they can offer. But again, I think the big thing is that even if a school is very comprehensive in what they offer, the student has to be willing to accept the help. And
Yes.
that's where I think sometimes the challenge is, from what I've seen quite a bit sometimes, especially the young adults that sort of, even if they've had a lot of support in college, think, oh, I want to do it on my own. I can do this myself now. And again, sometimes they really can if they've really learned what to do. But it's a even if they did super well in high school and thrived, the setup of college is very different as far as you have basically you're in class for several hours a week, and pretty much other than that, it's your time to do whatever you want. But you have to get the work done, and there's more work you're doing outside of class. Whereas in high school, because you have sort of a fairly structured day, you only have a certain number of hours after classes end before you have to go to bed. And if you do
And
any
that's
sort of
the
activities, you really are limited. So you sort of have to use that time in order to get the work done. But there's a lot more time you can mess around and then not get the work done in college.
that's the independence piece, right? That's really it. And to go back to your point a moment ago, so like I said this earlier in the podcast, I think, but um, anybody who's a coach or a tutor or in this sort of helping space at all we can really ever do is open doors, right? All we can really ever do is show a student or a family the options and recommendations that we have and that kind of thing. We can't push the student through that door. We can't make that student write that essay. We can't make that student go to the accommodations office, right? The student themselves has to actually do it. And like I said, and like you're saying, once you get to college, you're even more on your own because now your parents not the one needling you and reminding you they might be calling you on the phone, but they're not there usually. And so it's just that much more incumbent on the student to just, be more organized and take the initiative for themselves and the responsibility for themselves. Because yeah, you can stay up late partying or gaming or just doing whatever, just scrolling on your phone, but that essay is still due the next day. That test is still coming up. That class still starts at 8:30 in the morning. That's a lot of students struggle with that, but it's just part of the learning process and part of growing up and being an adult.
Right. And again, I realize the high schools vary in terms of grading policies, but I know in certain schools, there's a tendency where teachers will accept assignments that are late for quite a long time. And
Yeah,
again, there's certainly variability in college, but overall, I've seen from kids I work with there in college or young adults that, professors are far less sort of lenient with late policies in terms of either not accepting it at all or only under certain circumstances, or maybe for a day, if that. But there's not usually a
exactly.
long term sort of lateness, of assignment acceptance. That's also a big thing. You can't. And also, if you think about the fact that in college, there's usually less assignments, and so each assignment is usually worth far more. Because one of the big things I see just in terms of being successful in college, also, is the idea that if you don't really pay close attention to how you're doing, it's very easy, if you start to slip, to suddenly realize towards the end of the semester, oh, wait, I'm not going to pass this class. Whereas if you sort of pay attention to the grades throughout, you can, well, it's not ideal if you realize, oh, wait, I'm really not doing well. I don't know that I'm going to pass or do well enough. Let me withdraw from the class while I still can. So I think that it's important to sort of be mindful of the grades and how you're doing throughout the semester as well, because I think it's harder to always have as clear a sense of how you're doing. Sometimes until it's too late if you don't sort of keep on top of it.
Yeah, I work with, as you do, I work with a lot of high school and college students, and it's okay. Let me put it this way. In high school, typically you see your teacher every day, maybe every other day, and they're very accessible. You can ask them questions whenever you want. You can even email them typically and get responses pretty quickly. They're pretty much in your corner to help. That is much, much less common in college. In college, typically you only have a class twice a week for an hour and a half, give or take. usually in a fairly big lecture if you're a freshman or a sophomore. And so the opportunity to talk one-on-one with your professor is very rare. You either have to make a special, try to show up a little bit earlier, stay late and hope that you can talk to them, or show up at their office hours, which is usually a random hour or two during the week, and you have to be responsible for walking into their office when it's open. I work with students all the time. I was working with a student last night who has emailed his professor a bunch of times about a pretty important question about an assignment that's due. Professor never got back to them. That's not uncommon. So it's really just that much more important to sit in the class and pay attention and be proactive about asking any questions that you have in whatever way that might be, because the supports that you're used to in high school are very likely not there, or at least much less supportive in college than they have been in high school.
Yeah, and if you have, I mean, obviously, I think most high schools at this point use some sort of online portal like Canvas or Schoology. And in college, a lot of colleges have a platform. Canvas is one of them that a fair amount have, or Blackboard. But there's usually far less in the way of a requirement for a professor, at least from what I've seen, to actually use them. So there are some professors that do use them a lot, but not all do. So I think it's that element of having to keep track of stuff in multiple places that I think is even more so the case than in high school, oftentimes.
I'll tell you a story real quick. I was working with, for about a year and a half, I was working with a student at George Mason University, a pretty big public school in Northern Virginia. And love this kid. He was really trying hard. He would show me his portal with all his different classes. Literally every class used a different system. One used Canvas, one used Blackboard, one used something I'd never heard of. So in order to go and check his work, he had to literally log into like 5 different portals, which is infuriating as a student and also as like a coach as I was. But yeah, that is not very uncommon, unfortunately. And
Yeah,
it's
and
a
I think that's
huge,
also, sorry, but that's also why it's really valuable oftentimes to write down, have a central place where you put all the assignments in somewhere if they're not all in one place, so you can actually see everything in one place.
yeah, a lot of the work that I do as an executive functioning coach is that. It's like, okay, what's the system that works for you? And everybody's got a different system. Is it a planner? Is it Google Calendar? Is it a to-do list of some kind? I love this. I had one kid who would write his homework on a piece of paper and tape it to his bedroom door. Cool, it works for him. But yeah, it just means that that organizational system that you have, or maybe you don't have, is that much more important to consider.
Yeah, and I think your point about it not being one size fits all, that everyone can have a different system, is really important, because I think when you try to fit someone into someone's preconceived notion of this is what you should do, it usually doesn't go very well. And so I
Yep.
think looking at what each person, I mean, my general philosophy with it when I work with people is the idea that I think there's a strong value in having it written down. But I think beyond, because it's reduces the mental load, you're less likely to forget something. But beyond that, like the idea of there's many different ways to do it. Because sometimes people ask me like, what system do I use with people, and it really varies. I mean, I use various variety different apps with some people. I create a Google Doc with some people. Some people do it on paper. Just really depends on the person and the needs, and also how much access they have to an electronic device as well.
Yeah, so in the work that I do, if it's strictly academic counseling or executive functioning coaching, normally this is a very common conversation that I'll have with a student. It'll be our first or second session, and we'll talk about, hey, so it sounds like you've had trouble over the years handing in assignments or turning things in late or forgetting when things are due. And like, yeah, check all those boxes. And then I'll say something like, well, I'm assuming that, your mom or your dad or your teachers or other coaches over the years have given you all kinds of different planners or different tools to use, and you've used them to kind of appease your mom, and then 2 weeks later you've thrown them in the trash. And they're like, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So so then we laugh about it. And then I'll say, look, the truth is you need to find a system that works for you, whatever that system is. Then maybe I'll tell them the story about the kid who writes their work on the piece of paper, tapes to the bedroom door. Whatever system works for you is the right system, not what your mom says, your dad or teacher, but what works for you. And so what normally happens is, after a little while of kind of talking about that and thinking that through a little bit, they have a sense of an idea of like what the best organizational tool for them is. And then they try it out and see if it works. Another story that I love to tell is, this is years ago now, but I was working with this high school senior who was about to go off to college, and he knew he had to be more. He's like, I got to get this figured out. I was like, all right, let's talk about it. So we spent an entire session one day pretty much talking about like, okay, what works for you? What doesn't? What do you think you might need? And he eventually sort of in his head had this picture of like the perfect planner. It looked like this, and it had this, it was this size. Okay. Fine. So we spent like 20 minutes on one of our sessions just going through Amazon and looking at all the planners they had. And he found like the perfect planner that like matched what was in the image in his mind. He bought it, he used it every day for 6 months. So like that I think is a great example of like a student taking initiative and ownership over what they need to do. And then me as guiding them through it, but like then finding a system that works for them and then incorporating it. So easier said than done, but very important. Very, 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 very important.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think to sort of add to that, it's also, so obviously knowing what your assignments are, is sort of half the battle. And that's, an important first step. But what I find a lot of times is sometimes just as hard or even more challenging for, kids, young adults, and, certainly for adults beyond that as well, is the planning piece. You know you have all these assignments, here are all the due dates, but how do you work backwards to actually plan them out so that they get done by the due date?
Yeah.
It's a, that definitely is, it can definitely be challenging. And, certainly that's what I work on, a lot with people. And,
Yeah. Also easier said than done.
exactly. But again, I think there's also sometimes where I think if people have like a sense of what to do and they just need that structure to plan it out, having like a template someone uses to fill out can be useful. For
Yes.
others, even like an AI, certain AI programs, if they're programmed the right way or set up, if you know what prompts to use or, it's like pre-made so you can fill it in, can often help with planning because then it kind of guides you on what to do.
What I often find is there's a certain type of student who will be like really on top of their daily homework. They'll know what's due tomorrow, they'll know what's due the next day, and they're on top of that. But beyond that, they just really don't even think about it. And so they do really well with like the little daily homeworks that they might have. But when that big test is coming up or that big project or big essay is coming up, they forget about it till 2 or 3 days before, and then they're scrambling and they're basically working until the last minute to get it done. And obviously the work's not going to be as good typically, or they're just more stressed out about the whole process. And so, yeah, it's sort of like two separate types of organization. One is like, what do I have due tomorrow or the next day? And then there's the organization of looking ahead a week or two or three. What I often do with students that I do executive functioning work with is we'll try to meet on a Sunday or a Monday and we'll plan out their week. And so we'll start by looking at, okay, what do you have due Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Let's write that down, whatever system that you're using. Let's talk it out. Just talking about it, just going through the motions of like looking through Canvas, whatever it is, and then talking about it, even just that really helps it stick typically. And then if they have something bigger coming up, a big test, a big project, a big essay, whatever it is, well, now we can talk about it and plan backwards. Okay, you have a giant essay due in 2 weeks. What do you want to get done by this Friday in order to have it, ready to go for 2 weeks? And so having those conversations is important. And then, like you said, having those tools for the student to use to be more organized is also really
Right. And to your point too, I think the idea of looking ahead is really crucial. I mean, I sort of think about it where, certainly some people still use a paper planner, but, sort of when I think that used to be the norm, a long time, even more, the challenge was, because I remember, quite a bit used to work with people where, if they basically, if they only wrote the due date on the day it was due in a paper planner and it was on a different week, they wouldn't realize it until they opened to that
yes,
page. So
exactly.
like, so that's, so if, even for something like that, focusing on, having a list where you can sort of see in the actual page you're looking at, what are the upcoming stuff so you don't rely on having to look ahead a lot, because you need to look ahead. You can't sort of do it all last minute. Same thing where, if you're viewing stuff in a calendar, you can't just look at the day of all the time. You have to sort of look, a week or two or more, depending on how far out you get assignments scheduled.
There's a college student that I work with, and the system that he's found that works for him is uh, Google Calendar. So what he's got this awesome it took him like 2 years to set up because he's got all these little pieces to it, but now he's like killing it. And so what he does is, we started with Google Calendar and then we would put little things in, and he's gotten to a point now where he has his class. He's in college now. So he has his classes put on his calendar. They're color coded. He has the times during the day he wants to study. They're color coded. And then at the very top of the calendar, there's like a little bar that you can add specific notes. He puts whatever is due. So, and that's color coded. So it's like you look at this and it's just like a beautiful color coded, image of his academic life. And, part of what we'll do, part of the conversation we'll have is like, okay, you got this midterm coming up in 3 weeks. When are you going to start studying? Let's put some notes a week or two in advance of the midterm to start studying on this day or this day. You have your essay that's due in a week and a half. What do you want to get done on Thursday? What do you want to get done by Monday? And, it's a process for students who are challenged with executive functioning. Doing that is usually pretty challenging. They've never really done it before. It's a process. But I feel like part of my job, and probably yours too, is like guiding them through that and giving them the tools to kind of slowly build up to being able to do it on their own. I'm really proud of this student. I started working with him when he was a senior, and I think he was a senior, but he was in high school. And, now he's doing 90% of this stuff on his own. And he's doing a really good job in college. It's hard, but he's doing a good job. So anybody who is dedicated and motivated can figure this stuff out. It just takes some time and some energy. And man, the kids who are organized are so much less stressed than the kids who are disorganized.
Yeah.
The disorganized kids, they're spinning, their heads are going crazy. And so are the parents too.
Well, and I think that's crucial. That it's one of those things where, if you have kids or adults that are feeling overwhelmed and stressed because of, sort of how much they have to do and, it's not necessarily as organized as could be, oftentimes getting better organized and playing more effectively can reduce a lot of stress. And so I think that's just
Yes.
such a crucial point to really emphasize.
Yeah. Yeah. The work that I think there are, how to put this, I think that there are some, I call them executive functioning coaches who really focus on the academics, which is fine. That's great. My background, though, has always been a mix of the academics and the mentoring, meaning I'm very, very mindful of a student's emotional, like where they are, whether it's anxiety or stress or just anything, right? How they're doing and so a lot of the times we'll have those conversations around it. It sounds like you're really stressed out. It sounds like you're really disorganized. Sounds like you're pretty overwhelmed with school. Let's try something out here. Let's see if we can create a system that that keeps you more organized. I'm willing to bet it's going to help out with your stress. And sometimes we're like, I don't know if I believe that. And sometimes like, yeah, that sounds great. But 9 times out of 10, if not 9 out of 100, a month later, if we go back to talking about the initial conversation, like, oh yeah, I feel so much better now because I actually know what's going on in my life. And I'm not, half of their stress was the disorganization of not knowing what was doing, when to do it, and how to do it. And they put it off as a result, which just increases the stress load.
Yeah, no, definitely important point. I see that quite a bit too, that it makes such a difference, when you take that step back and then you really get a system in and you can sort of maintain it, that then, leads to definitely, in most cases, a lot less stress because you kind of know what to do and you kind of plan, you can get through, this is what I have to do today. And that's good enough because I know that everything else is planned out. So I only have to worry about today because everything else for tomorrow is already planned out.
Yes. Yeah.
So very good. Well, it's definitely a really great conversation. I think we definitely got a lot of it really interesting. The things that came out, hopefully all of you listening out there, can take a lot of practical stuff away. And I guess, Matt, for those of people, for people to be able to sort of find you or contact you, what would be where can you be found?
Yeah. So I'm out there in a lot of different ways nowadays. For my college consulting work, the book that I wrote, like I said, Unlocking College Admissions, my website is just unlockingcollegeadmissions.com. I have a lot of information there. There's links to my book. There's a lot of other college resources that I have there that you can look at or buy. I also do college essay and application review. So if you send me your essay, I will send you detailed feedback or other parts of your application. I have an essay to read in about 10 minutes once we get off the phone here today. And then for my mentorship focused work, I run Life Coaching SD. Again, Life Coaching SD. And that's more for students and families who are dealing with social or emotional challenges. I'm not a therapist, but I certainly get into some of these life goals and life challenges that students face. And we do a lot of work on that. I also been doing some social media recently, which I've had some fun with. So I'm Unlocking College on TikTok and Instagram. I do, for anybody who's out there who's interested, I do a few times a week TikTok lives, which basically means if you follow me on TikTok, you get a notification of when I go live. And I'm on there giving free advice and free guidance to anybody who has any questions about the college search or application process. I have fun doing it. I get like dozens and dozens of questions getting thrown in. So anybody who's out there wants to join, feel free.
Oh, so that sounds like a great resource. I'll make sure all of that information gets into the show notes so people can find you.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and if you like this episode and found it helpful, definitely like it. Subscribe to the podcast on pretty much probably whatever platform you're obviously listening on, Spotify, Apple Music, and I think a bunch of others. And hope this has been helpful. And definitely tune in for our next episode and make sure you subscribe so you can get notifications on when episodes are released. And thanks again, Matt, for joining us today.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's great being on, really.
All right. Take care, everyone.
All right.